Hey fellas, hope you guys doing great. In today's video we will see, what if Naruto merges his soul with Aang and Got Harem in Avtar, Part 1. Huge shout out to PSaid. If you end up liking this video please consider subscribe, and like the video. So let's start the story. Naruto had finally managed to keep his promise. Sasuke had rejoined the Leaf, though the price had been Killer Bee's capture. Naruto and his friends had rushed to the cave where Tobi should be, according to what Sasuke knew. They had arrived and carefully entered the cave, not encountering any resistance. Itachi had taken care of Kabuto, and by extension his zombies, and Naruto had killed Black Zetsu, which in turn caused the White Zetsu to wilt away quickly. Soon they had arrived at a room where Tobi had just finished extracting the 8-tail from Bee. After that a major battle had started, though Naruto had made sure to get Bee's corpse out of there so that it wouldn't get damaged in the struggle. In the end Naruto and his friends had won. "You can't fight anymore, Tobi, just give it up," Naruto said as he, Tsunade, Sasuke and Hinata closed in on said person. The rest of the group was injured and were currently being treated by Shizune and Sakura. "It seems you are right, I can barely move and am unable to phrase shift," Tobi responded as the group had gathered around him. "I have only one option," he continued. Then he activated his eye, dying and taking you with me. He then sent all of the people around him into a dimensional tunnel, while he himself died from chakra exhaustion. Naruto and his friends were falling through the tunnel. Even the QB, which Naruto had managed to tame, was there, though his power didn't seem to be with him. "What's going on?" Naruto asked, thinking that this dimensional travel seemed to be taking longer than it should. "This isn't your average dimensional travel," the QB replied. "This isn't just taking advantage of different dimensions within the same world, or even sending us to alternative versions of our own. This is sending us to a place where the rules of nature could be vastly different than what we are used to. However, that isn't important right now. What is important is that since there is noon on the other side to stabilizing this tunnel, our individual souls are not strong enough to travel through it. They will be shredded upon going through it, to the point where we either disappear or become mindless monsters, only interested in destruction." "How can you be sure?" Tsunade said. "While I do not remember much of being the Jubi, I do remember how it came to exist. Where the Jubi came from, it was a hero of unparalleled power, though he looked like a normal person. However, he was attacked and sent through a portal and turned into the raving monster you know as the Jubi." "Now can I continue please?" QB replied. "Please do," Tsunade said. "As I said before, individually our souls are too weak to get through. If we merge, however, we should be able to make it through," he explained. "However, one of us would need to be the main focus of the merger, as the many conflicting personalities merging together is only going to make the end result into a maniac. We would all in some ways affect this person's personality, but it will not be something major. In that case, I will say that neither you nor Sasuke qualify to being the main focus of this merger," Tsunade said. "While both of you have changed for the better, I would not trust you not to have a relapse." "While I should feel insulted, I do understand where you are coming from," Sasuke stated. "Personally, I don't trust you with this either, so I will not agree to you being to focus," he stated, looking at Tsunade. "So that leaves the white-eyed girl and the annoying orange brat," the QB stated. It might fight more, but knew that time was limited, and since the choice was between complete elimination and limited existence, it would choose the latter. "I think that Naruto would be the best choice," Hinata stated. "Not only do I think he deserves it more, but he is also the most adaptive of us all, giving him an advantage if this world we are traveling to is really different from our own." "Hey, don't sell yourself short, Hinata," Naruto said. "You deserve to go on just as much as I do, and I'm sure you'll be able to adapt to anything." "While I agree that she deserves it just as much as you do, if not slightly more," QB stated, "it does not change the fact that when it comes to adapting to new situations you are a natural, which is what we need in whatever world we arrive in." He paused for a moment. "Fact is that we do not even know what state we will be in when we arrive in the dimension. We could get any one of our bodies back, or some kind of merger of them all, or we could enter a newborn baby in that world and take over its life in some way or another. Therefore, we need someone who can adapt more than we need anything else." "Okay, so Naruto is the focus," Sasuke said simply. "So how do we do this?" "Basically, we group hug while willing our souls to join with his," QB stated. "He needs to concentrate on the things about himself that he feels are the most important, the things he would rather die than allow them to change. And your love for ramen should not be the kind of thing you should focus on, or you might end up losing parts of yourself that really define you, like your willingness to give everything you are to protect your friends. Okay, I understand, Naruto said as the others started to gather around him. From the beginning, Naruto was aware of some of the changes that the people around him initiated. Physically, he got both Hinata's and Sasuke's Dijutsu, QB's ability to produce and control Yuki, and enhanced chakra control from Tsunade. Turns out that enhanced chakra control was a Senju bloodline ability. Mentally, he got some of Sasuke's vengeful streak, though it got tempered by his own forgiving nature to the point where his vengeance would mostly be taken through pranks and humiliation, though he wasn't above killing someone if he felt that it the only way to save those he wanted to protect. Hinata for some reason strengthened his perverted side, especially about seeing two girls together. Because Naruto had always been focused on Sakura, Hinata had developed a fantasy of all three of them together, which had led her to becoming bisexual, as long as Naruto was somehow involved. Tsunade made him more of a gambler, though he was quite sure that he didn't inherit her luck. He was sure that there were other changes that he just wasn't aware of at this point, but hopefully nothing too bad. About a minute after the merger was complete, Naruto saw a light coming towards him, and he knew he was about to enter another dimension. When Naruto hit the portal, he felt an intense pain, like something was trying to pull him apart, but by concentrating he was able to fight it off. Soon he was able to see things around him, and he became aware that he was falling from the sky towards the earth. He panicked for a moment until he became aware that he currently didn't have a body, so he shouldn't be in any danger. Then he noticed a weird light coming from his right and turned towards it, but it hit him before he had time to act, taking him wherever the comet-like light was going. Next thing he knew, he hit a newborn baby, being locked inside it. He thought it ironic that he, who had had someone locked inside him when he was a baby, was now getting locked inside a baby himself. He quickly found that he couldn't control the movements of the baby at all. He was simply along for the ride, feeling, seeing, hearing, smelling and tasting everything that Aang, the baby, did. He also heard the boy's thoughts, as well as feeling the presence of whatever that comet of light was, though it was faint, almost separate from the boy himself. In some instances he almost felt like he was part of the link between the boy and the comet. It was years later that he found out what the comet was. It was the Avtar link, what linked Aang to all his past lives. He figured this out when Aang was told that he was the Avatar by the elders. At this point he no longer thought of himself as separate from Aang, though he didn't agree with the monks. Everyone has a right to live, since he knew that some people were just evil and had to be dealt with decisively. He learned everything that Aang learned and was sure he could do the same if given a chance. Aang had taken his sky bison, Appa, and was running away from the temple after finding out that they wanted to take him away from Gyatso and send him to another temple. Instead of doing as the monks wanted him to do, he decided that he would see the world and try all kinds of fun things, like penguin sledding. He was currently stuck in a storm and Appa was getting tired. Soon they fell into the water, and just as Aang, and Naruto, was sure that he was going to drown, the Avatar link flared up, taking over control of the body and locking both him and Appa in a block of ice. Two people, a boy and a girl, are sailing through the icy reaches of the South Pole. The boy is spearfishing, holds his spear to the ready, while the girl is staring into the water on the other end of the boat. The boy sees a fish swimming close to the surface right in front of him and starts following its movement with his eyes. "It's not getting away from me this time," the boy states confidently, with a quick grin at the girl. "Watch and learn, Katara. This is how you catch a fish." Katara isn't impressed by the statement of the boy and turns back to the water, where she sees another fish in the water. Pleasantly surprised, she shoots a quick glance toward the boy before removing the glove of her left hand. She stretches her arm out in the direction of the fish while taking a deep breath. Her look is a mixture of concentration and doubt while she starts to make a wavy motion with her wrist, moving her hand up and down. The water in front of Katara starts to ripple, and all of a sudden a bubble of water shoots up, holding the fish in its center. "Sokka, look!" Sokka, Katara says in a happy voice. "Shush! Katara, you're going to scare it away," Sokka says, a look of bliss adorning his face. He wets his lips with his tongue and wiggles his fingers without letting the fish out of his sight. Mmm. I can already smell it cookin'. Meanwhile, behind Sokka's back, Katara is making circular movements with both her arms, suspending the bubble of water that holds the fish in the air and moving it around. Her face is contorted in concentration. But Sokka! I caught one! She says while moving the bubble containing her fish slowing over her head towards Sokka, who's still oblivious to her success. The moment the bubble hovers over his head, Sokka raises his spear to strike the fish he was following. He bursts the bubble of water with the butt of his weapon, accidentally releasing the fish and soaking himself. Katara follows the arc of the fish as it soars through the air and into the sea. Hey! She exclaims in an indignant tone. Ugh! Sokka exclaims before turning to his sister angrily while placing his spear in the boat. Why is it that every time you play with magic water, I get soaked? He clenches his fists, wringing out some of the water. Katara sighs in annoyance. It's not magic, it's waterbending and it's. Yeah, an ancient art unique to our culture, blah blah blah. Sokka interrupts her. Look, I'm just saying that if I had weird powers, I'd keep my weirdness to myself. This causes Katara to raise an eyebrow and cross her arms. You're calling me weird? I'm not the one who makes muscles at myself every time I see my reflection in the water. Katara smiles mockingly at Sokka as he is seen looking at his arm muscles and his reflection in the water. His happy look vanished upon hearing his sister's remark. He turns around slowly to face her, but before they can continue their quarrel they are shaken, and with a shock, Sokka realizes that the boat has strayed into dangerous rapids. The boat is swiftly headed for a barrier of ice that is crushing everything in its path. Sokka paddles the boat in an attempt to stay clear of any floating chunks of ice. He manages to gain just enough speed to keep the boat from being crushed by two icebergs that slam together right behind the boat. Watch out! Go left! Go left! Katara says as they hit some chunks of ice. The boat manages to stay clear of some of the icebergs, but then it is completely crushed between two ice floes. Katara and Sokka narrowly manage to save themselves by jumping onto one of the floes. Katara nearly slides off again, but comes to a halt just at the rim of the floe. The waters have calmed down again, but Sokka and Katara find themselves caught with nowhere to go. Katara quickly scrambles away from the rim to the middle of the floe where Sokka landed. His spear stands upright beside him in the ice. You call that left? Katara asked. You don't like my steering? Well, maybe you should have, Sokka states while mockingly moving his arms. Water bent us out of the ice. Katara got to her feet. So it's my fault? She asked. I knew I should have left you home, Sokka states while Katara stares at him in anger while he just calmly sits there. Leave it to a girl to screw things up. You are the most sexist, Katara begins, swinging back her hands to emphasize her words, and subconsciously waterbending the water behind her. Immature net brain, she swings her arms again, still waterbending. I'm embarrassed to be related to you. She swings her hands back with such force that the iceberg behind her cracks. Sokka, annoyed with Katara's outburst, was staring to the ground, but looks up when he hears the iceberg crack. Katara continues her outbursts and violent movements, causing little chunks of ice to come loose from the iceberg. Ever since Mom died, I've been doing all the work around camp while you've been off playing soldier, Katara states with another swing of her hand, thus unknowingly enlarging the crack in the iceberg with her waterbending. Sokka, seeing what Katara's rage is doing to the iceberg, cowers away. He points at the iceberg and says, Katara. I even wash all the clothes. Katara interrupts him. Have you ever smelled your dirty socks? Let me tell you, not pleasant. As she yells out that last word, she unconsciously waterbends, causing another split in the chunk of ice. Katara, settle down, Sokka says. No, that's it. I'm done helping you, Katara states. From now on, you're on your own. Her last movement causes the split behind her to crack even further, moving from the base to the top of the iceberg. Sokka gasps for air, and it is only now that Katara notices the chunk of ice behind her. She turns around to see it collapse, and they are sent back several feet by large wave caused by the falling ice. Sokka holds a protective arm over Katara while they are both lying flat on the floe, trying to stay on. After releasing Katara, Sokka states, Okay, you've gone from weird to freakish, Katara. You mean I did that? Katara said, surprised. Sokka gives Katara a nudge with his elbow. Yep. Congratulations, he says sarcastically. Suddenly, the water beneath them begins to glow a brilliant blue. As strange bubbles come out of the water, the two siblings cower back from the rim, scrambling back on their feet. Without warning, an enormous iceberg bursts to the surface. Katara moves closer and stares at the iceberg while Sokka behind her stretches out his hand as if he wants to hold her back. They see a figure in the iceberg, perched in lotus, with glowing arrows on his head and hands. Katara questioningly raises one eyebrow. Then the figure suddenly opens its eyes, which glow just like the arrows on his head and hands. This sudden movement startles both Katara and Sokka. He's alive! We have to help, she states and grabs Sokka's club and pulls her hood over her head as she heads off toward the strange boy. Sokka stretches out his hand to hold Katara back, but she is already jumping over the ice toward the boy. Katara, get back here! We don't know what that thing is. He then quickly retracts his spear out of their flow and follows Katara. The two use 5 handily placed flows as stepping stones to get to the large iceberg that encases the glowing boy. Katara is the first to reach it, and she repeatedly strikes the iceberg on the same spot with Sokka's club. When she slams through the ice, she and her brother are thrown back by a strong gust of wind that escapes from within the iceberg. The hole Katara made causes fissures to run over the whole iceberg and crack it open with an explosion. An incredible beam of light rockets towards the sky. As the mist from the air explosion begins to settle, Sokka, who had protectively clutched Katara, releases her to see what is going on. Light still encircles the remains of the once big mountain of ice. Sokka looks at his sister, and they both get up. Katara holds on to her brother while he points his spear at the crater, ready to protect them. Sokka lowers his spear in shock when they behold a blue figure emerge from the crater of the iceberg. He then raises the spear up again and says stop. The figure slowly erects himself, now standing atop the crater, looking down at them, causing Katara and Sokka to marvel in wonder and fear. The circles of light finally die down too as the boy stops glowing. The figure seems to be nothing more than a young boy who suddenly faints. Katara gasps and runs forward to catch before he crashes to the ground. Sokka begins to poke at the boy's head with the blunt tip of his spear. Waving the spear away, Katara says stop it. She then places the boy gently against the base of the crater. The young boy as he slowly opens his gray eyes. He gasps in awe as he beholds the young water tribe girl who stares at him in relief. Her hair loopy sways in the wind. Naruto knew right away that something was different. He no longer felt detached. Then he saw that he could actually control the body, and realized that the Avatar link must have forced him to merge with Aang since they needed to go through him to take control of the body and save Aang. Now he was no longer just inside Aang, he was Aang. I need to ask you something, he said in a weak voice. What? Katara asked. Please. Come closer, he said. What is it? Katara asked in a curious tone. Will you go penguin sledding with me? Aang asked in a happy voice. Sure. I guess. Katara answered. Aang elegantly rises to his feet in one swift motion, surprising the other two. Katara looks at him in awe while Sokka backs away in shock, aiming his spear at him again. Katara glances at him in disbelief. Seems I can control airbending just as good as pre-merger, Aang thought. He then started looking around and rubbing his head, while Katara scrambles on her feet. What's going on here? You tell us, Sokka stated, aggressively, and points at the top of the crater. How did you get in the ice? And why aren't you frozen? He then pokes Aang with his spear. Aang lazily pushes the spear away. I'm not sure. A gruff noise can be heard from within the crater of the iceberg. Quickly, the boy scrambles up the ice and happily jumps on the head of a large, furry creature that has the same arrow-shaped marking on his forehead as the boy. Appa? Are you alright? Aang asks as he hangs down the side of the beast to look at its eyes, which are still closed. Wake up, buddy. Aang opens an eyelid that immediately closes again once he releases it. He jumps down to the front of the bison and tries to lift its enormous head. Sokka and Katara appear around the corner when Appa finally starts to react by opening his mouth and licking Aang with his giant tongue. Sokka's mouth drops open upon seeing the beast. Ha ha! You're okay! Aang exclaims happily and hugs the bison's nose. Appa stands up on his 6 legs and stretches himself. Aang starts petting the bison's nose. What is that thing? Sokka asked in shock. This is Appa, my flying bison, Aang said, getting a look of disbelief from Sokka. Right, and this is Katara, my flying sister, he states sarcastically. Katara shoots him an odd look. Aang looks questioningly at Sokka for a moment, but his attention is diverted back toward his bison when Appa starts to inhale deeply. Appa sneezes, sending a green blast of mucus out of his nose. Aang ducks just in time, however, Sokka becomes slathered in it. He squeals in disgust and begins to frantically clean it off, rubbing his face in the snow under the amused gaze of his sister. Don't worry, it'll wash out, Aang states happily. Green slime is hanging from Sokka's face to his glove, dripping down as he retracts his hand. Katara covers her mouth in disgust. So do you guys live around here? Hopefully I can start finding out how long I was frozen. Sokka pointed his spear accusingly at Aang, who is surprised to see the thing. Don't answer that. Did you see that crazy bolt of light? Sokka said he was probably trying to signal the Fire Navy. Katara pushes Sokka's spear away again and addresses him sarcastically. Oh yeah, I'm sure he's a spy for the Fire Navy. You can tell by that evil look in his eye, she states, causing Aang to shoot the two an earnest grin. The paranoid one is my brother, Sokka. You never told us your name. I'm Achu. Aang begins only to sneeze halfway through, rocketing himself into the air, before falling down and landing softly. I'm Aang. He tries again. You just sneezed, Sokka states, and point into the air and flew 10 feet in the air. Really? It felt higher, more like 14 feet. Aang stated, having gotten good at estimating heights when he was a ninja. Katara gasps for air and comprehension. You're an airbender? Sure am. Aang states, not sure why Katara seems so shocked. Giant light beams, flying bison, airbenders. Sokka states while walking away, I think I got midnight sun madness. I'm going home to where stuff makes sense. He then realizes that he is stranded in the middle of the ocean with no way home. Well, if you guys are stuck, Appa and I can give you a lift, Aang says while jumping onto Appa. We'd love a ride. Thanks, Katara states and runs to the side of the bison. Oh no! I'm not getting on that fluffy snot monster, Sokka states. Katara, while climbing on top of Appa with the help of Aang, says, Are you hoping some other monster will come along and give you a ride home? You know, before you freeze to death? Sokka opens his mouth in defiance and points at Katara, ready to retaliate, but he can't think of something. He sighs and bows his head in consent. Soon both siblings are sitting on Appa's saddle. Sokka has his arms crossed in front of him with a sulking expression on his face, while Katara is full of excitement and anticipation. Okay, first-time flyers, hold on tight, Aang stated. Appa, yip yip. Aang then wipes the reins and Appa growls in response. He moves his tail up and down and takes a huge jump into the air. He soars through the air for a moment, before belly flopping into the water with a splash. The bison begins trudging through the water slowly. Katara crawls to the front of the saddle, while Aang urges his bison again by wiping the reins once more. Come on, Appa. Yip yip, he says. Wow, that was truly amazing, Sokka says in a sarcastic tone, causing Katara to glare at him. Appa's just a little tired. A little rest, and he'll be soaring through the sky, Aang states confidently. You'll see. This causes Katara to smile at Aang, who returns the gesture. This girl is really pretty, Aang thought. Maybe I should try and date her, and maybe something more. Wait, where did that come from? This isn't the time. I need to find out what is going on and then return to the air temple and get some advice before learning the rest of the elements. I don't know what trouble the monks were talking about, and who know what I missed while frozen in that ice. Aang didn't realize that while he was thinking that, he had continued smiling at Katara. Katara had noticed, and it made her slightly uncomfortably. Why are you smiling at me like that? She asked. Oh, I was smiling? Aang asked. Sokka throws his head back and sticks his tongue out in disgust while groaning loudly. Katara glares at him while Appa continues to make his way through the icy sea, flapping his tail in the water. A short while later, Aang lays lazily on Appa's head, his arms tucked under his head. Katara crawls to the front of the saddle again to have a better look at the boy. She leans on the front of the saddle and rests her head on her arm. "Hey," Katara said. "Hey. What you thinking about?" Aang asked. "I guess I was wondering, you being an airbender and all, if you had any idea what happened to the Avtar?" Katara said. Aang thought for a moment the trouble the monks were talking about could be related to the water tribes, but I don't think Katara is involved. Perhaps I should go for getting more information before telling her too much. What do you mean with what happened to the Avtar? He finally asks. Well, he disappeared around 100 years ago, and no one has seen him since, Katara said, shocking Aang though he hid it well. Just before the Fire Nation wiped out the airbenders. Well, apart from you, and maybe the Avtar. Wait, that happened 100 years ago, but I was just there, unless I've been sealed in the ice for longer than I thought, Aang said in shock. I didn't think anyone could survive in ice that long, Katara replied. I think I need time to think, Aang said. Okay. Good night then, Aang, sleep tight. Night, Katara, Aang responded. So the Fire Nation was part of the trouble that the monks were talking about, Aang thought, and that was 100 years ago. Were the airbenders really wiped out, or did they just go into hiding, waiting for me to return? The Fire Nation shouldn't have the means to attack the air temples, so perhaps they are still up there, but I don't want to get my hopes up. Aang's thoughts then turned to his current situation, wonder if Katara noticed that I avoided her question, or if I managed to sidetrack her. I don't know whether I should tell her the truth or not. I already realize that I like her, and therefore I don't want her to look at me differently. I also need a way to keep my pervertedness in check, or I'm going to be in big trouble. Damn you, Hinata, couldn't you have given me your insightfulness instead of all your pervertedness? Anyway, need to become the Avatar anyway, so that means I need to find a waterbender to teach me. Maybe Katara knows someone. I also still have some fun things I want to try, though I'll cut some of them out of my plans, since they just won't be as fun when there's a war going on. He then turned to his side and fell asleep. Aang? Aang! Wake up. Aang woke with a start. Need to regain some of my ninja senses. How did they get me of Appa and in here without me noticing? He thought before sitting up, causing Katara, who was sitting beside him, to stand up as she sees that Aang is awake. It's okay, we're in the village now. Come on, get ready, Katara says, then points at the door. Everyone's waiting to meet you. Aang happily gets out of bed and starts to dress himself, while remaining seated, while Katara takes a step toward the door. Before she exits, however, she glances back at Aang and stares in wonder at the blue, arrow-shaped tattoos that seemingly cover his arms, legs, back and head. She gasps for air. Before Aang was able to get up, Katara pulls him along on his arm and out of the tent toward the entire congregation of villagers. He passes Sokka, who is sitting at the side of the tent, sharpening his boomerang. Aang, this is the entire village, Katara states, pointing at a line of villagers in front of them. Entire village, Aang. Aang bows respectfully toward the villages, but they cower away in fear, bringing a surprised look on Katara and Aang's face. Sokka just watches from a distance. Why are they all looking at me like that? Did Appa sneeze on me? Aang says as he checks his clothing while an elderly woman steps forward out of the line of villagers. Well, no one has seen an airbender in 100 years, Kanna said. We thought they were extinct, until my granddaughter and grandson found you. Oh, right, Katara mentioned that yesterday, Aang said. Aang, this is my grandmother, Katara stated. Call me Gran-Gran, Kanna said. Sokka walks toward Aang and abruptly snatches his staff out of his hands and starts to examine it. What is this, a weapon? He asked in an annoyed tone. You can't stab anything with this. Aang used an air current to cause the staff to smack Sokka's head lightly before returning it to his own hands. It's not for stabbing. It's for airbending. He opens the staff into a glider, making Sokka gasp in fright and cover his head with his hands. Magic trick. A village girl said, do it again. Not magic, airbending, Aang states as he moves his glider around him, visually demonstrating what he is talking about. It lets me control the air currents around my glider and fly. You know, last time I checked, humans can't fly. Sokka mocked. Check again. Aang states and grabs hold of his glider and pushes himself off the ground, leaving Katara and Sokka behind to cover their faces against the sudden wind. The village stares in awe as Aang makes some loops and turns in the sky. He's flying, a village girl said in admiration. Aang makes another loops and speeds up to soar past the gazing villagers. It's amazing, she says. Aang's shadow passes over Katara, who's smiling broadly at him. Aang, wanting to impress the villagers some more, flies sideways and closes his eyes while grinning broadly. As a result of this, he smacks full on against the village's watchtower, causing it to crumble. Katara covers her mouth in sympathy as she watches Aang struggles to get his head out of the icy watchtower. He succeeds to free himself and tumbles down. Katara immediately rushes to his side while Sokka stares in shock at the damage inflicted to his watchtower. My watchtower! He cries out. Aang lies covered in snow at the base of the partially collapsed tower. Katara and some other girls of the tribe run smiling toward Aang. Katara offers her hand to pull him out of the snow and says that was amazing. Akka runs toward his watchtower and starts to pat it in the hope that he can save it from collapsing any further. While Aang spins his staff around to retract its wings, Sokka is being knocked down by a large pack of snow that falls down. Great! You're an airbender, Katara is a waterbender. Sokka says in annoyance. Together you can just waste time all day long. He wedges himself free from underneath the weight of the snow and stalks off. You're a waterbender? Aang said hopefully, wondering whether she could teach him. Well, sort of. Katara said, uncertain. Not yet. Alright, no more playing. Kanna said, come on, Katara. You have chores. Kanna leads Katara away from Aang. The surrounding villagers part to let the duo pass. I told you, he's the real thing, Gran. Katara said excitedly, I finally found a bender to teach me. Katara, try not to put all your hopes in this boy. Kanna said calmly. But he's special. I can tell. Katara said while she clenches her fist and closed her eyes in hope. I sense he's filled with much wisdom. Katara opens her eyes again and glances back toward Aang, who is surrounded by a bunch of kids. He smiles while his tongue is stuck to his staff. See? He says, now my tongue is stuck to my staff. Much to Aang's discomfort, one of the smaller village boys starts to yank his staff, pulling Aang along with every movement. The village kids laugh and applaud Aang as his tongue remains stuck on his staff. Sokka held a speech to some kids about the importance of fighting for the tribe and then was forced to stop to allow them to go to the loo. Katara runs up to Sokka just as the children leave. Have you seen Aang? She asks him worriedly. Gran said he disappeared over an hour ago. Just then Aang came out of an igloo that serves as a bathroom, and he pulls his pants up a bit higher. Wow! Everything freezes in there, he states and points toward the bathroom with a smile on his face. Sokka's soldiers halt beside Aang and laugh with him. Sokka says and points at Aang. Katara, get him out of here. This lesson is for warriors only. Sokka was about to walk away when he hears the sound of playing children. He turns around to see the village children sliding down Appa's tail like a slide. The end of the tail is held upwards, so the children are propelled in the air. They fly over Sokka's spear that now serves as a mark that they need to cross before landing in a soft pile of snow. Katara laughs as a boy lands head first in the snow, but Sokka rushes forward. Stop! Stop it right now! Sokka states in anger, and the laughter of the children dies down immediately, and Appa turns his head to look at Sokka, who accusingly directs his anger to Aang. What's wrong with you? We don't have time for fun and games with the war going on. Sokka takes back his spear and looks annoyed at the laughing children who run past him. While training and working are necessary, if you do not counterbalance it with fun, especially with children, then they will not be focused in the long run and will only grow hateful of everyone. Sokka raises one eyebrow in disbelief. You're kidding, right? Aang looks questioningly at Sokka, but then the expression on his face changes to enthusiasm as he catches sight of Otter Penguin. Penguin, The animal startles at Aang's outburst and quickly waddles off. Aang gives chase, racing past Katara and Sokka, enhancing his speed with his airbending. He leaves a deep trail in the snow as he dashes after the penguin. "He's kidding, right?" Sokka said. Katara just shakes her head at him, agreeing with both the boy. They needed to be prepared for an attack, but they needed to make sure not to pressure the children too much. Katara approaches the otter penguin habitat, where hundreds of otter penguins are walking or sliding down icebergs, in search for Aang. "Aang?" she calls out. She then sees Aang chasing the penguins while laughing. Hee. "Hey, come on, little guy. Wanna go sledding?" he says to a penguin before he jumps at it, but the animal evades his attempt and Aang belly flops in the snow. He turns on his back and quickly erects himself with his airbending as Katara comes up beside him. Heh. I have a way with animals. Aang stretches his arms wide and imitates the sound and walk of the animals around them, making Katara laugh. Hee Aang, I'll help you catch a penguin if you teach me waterbending, Katara states. Aang hangs on the tail of a penguin that's pulling him through the snow. I would love to take the deal, but there is just one problem, Aang states as he airbends himself to a sitting position. I'm an airbender, not a waterbender. Isn't there someone in your tribe who can teach you? No. Katara states sadly, you're looking at the only waterbender in the whole South Pole. This isn't right. Aang states a waterbender needs to master water. He thinks for a moment. What about the North Pole? There's another water tribe up there, right? Maybe they could teach you. Maybe, but we haven't had contact with our sister tribe in a long time. Katara states it's not exactly turned right at the second glacier. It's on the other side of the world. But you forget, I have a flying bison, he says happily and points at himself. Appa and I can personally fly you to the North Pole. Katara, we're going to find you a master. I don't know. Katara says in an unsure tone, I've never left home before. Well, you think about it. I can try and teach you some basic stuff, but don't know how many airbending techniques can be helpful for a waterbender. In the meantime, can you help me catch one of these penguins? Okay, listen closely, my young pupil, Katara says in a mock teacher voice and slightly bows her head toward Aang. Catching penguins is an ancient and sacred art. She pulls a fish out of her sleeve. Observe. She tosses Aang the fish. As he catches it with an uncomprehending look on his face, the penguins immediately begin crowding him. He laughs as the penguins swarm over him, pulling him down amidst their ranks. Aang and Katara are sliding down an iceberg slide while each sitting atop of a penguin. They soar through the air for a moment before landing on the sloop and continuing their journey downwards. They race down, and Aang uses another iceberg as a ramp to propel him in the air and to soar over and past Katara. She in turn uses the next jump to land next to Aang again. The two laugh and shout out as they gleefully ride over snowy bumps. I haven't done this since I was a kid, Katara states happily. The two ride through a tunnel of ice. Katara is in the lead and tries to hold Aang back by constantly changing her direction when he wants to pass her. Aang solves this problem by increasing his speed with airbending, enabling him to race over the ceiling past Katara. The tunnel levels out on an open plain of ice where the two get off their rides. Aang walks over to a Fire Nation shipwreck. Whoa! So this is a Fire Nation warship, isn't it? Aang said. Yes, and a very bad memory for my people. Aang sat down. I need to tell you something. What? Katara asked. Two things, actually, both secrets that I trust you to keep, Aang said, and I want to tell you because I like you and think you can be trusted. I also hope that this won't change your opinion of me. I'll keep your secrets, Katara said. My first secret is that I am the Avatar Aang began. I've been in that block of ice for 100 years. Everyone I knew is likely dead by now. Katara enveloped Aang in a hug. I'm sorry for your loss, Aang, she said. I admit that I thought you were connected to the Avatar somehow, but didn't know for sure that you were actually him. My second secret will be a lot harder to believe. Heck, if it hadn't happened to me, I wouldn't believe it myself, Aang said. Katara tried to say something, but Aang put a finger to her mouth. Please don't say anything until I'm finished. Katara nodded. Part of me is from a different dimension, Katara's face now had a confused expression. I was in a fight that ended with me being sent here. I won't go into the details apart from the fact that he was a bad person that needed to be stopped, and while I managed that, it also threw me to this dimension. Aang took a deep breath. When I arrived here, I was only a soul without a body, and before I even hit this planet, I was hit by a comet of light, which I later found out was the soul of the Avatar traveling from its previous life to find its next incarnation. I ended up being taken along for the ride and became part of the link between the previous avatars and Aang. I experienced everything Aang did as if it was me doing it, even if I wasn't in control of anything. As time went by, it became harder to tell who I really was, until I reached the point where I felt that I was Aang. When the Avatar state took over to save Aang from drowning, locking him and me in stasis inside a block of ice, it also merged us completely, which in effect just allowed me to move the body rather than just be along for the ride, since I already felt like a part of him. Katara just stared at him in shock. After 3 minutes she finally spoke. So you are the Avatar, but you are also something else? Very much so. I actually need to check whether I still have my old abilities, Aang said, and put his hands in the Ram sign and gathered chakra. Shadow clone, he said. There was a puff of smoke and another Aang appeared beside him. Seems it actually still works. At that point Katara fainted. She woke up a short while later and looked at Aang. I think I just had a very strange dream, she stated. If the dream involved me being from a different dimension and making clones of myself, then I'm afraid it wasn't a dream, Aang responded. Oh, okay, Katara said. So you are 112 chronologically, 12 biologically, but how old are you mentally? She then asked. Well, when I left my own dimension I was 17, but merging with Aang and living his life I would say that I am actually still very young mentally, maybe 13 or 14. Aang responded. What was your name in the other dimension? Katara then asked, curious about where this person was coming from, but afraid to ask about his abilities in general. Naruto, Aang responded. I'll give you some time to think about it, but in the meantime let's explore this ship. He then started to walk to the ship. Aang, stop. Katara said, we're not allowed to go near it. This ship could be booby-trapped. If you want to be a bender, you have to let go of fear. Aang stated, you can be cautious but you must not be afraid. Katara ponders over that remark for a moment, and then walks toward Aang with a scared look upon her face. The two venture closer toward the ship. Aang helps Katara to climb some of the blocks of ice that lay beside the ship, and they crawl through a hole in the hull of the ship. The two walk through the silent rooms of the shipwreck. Some white hamsters roam the otherwise deserted ship. Aang enters a room stocked to the rim with weapons. This ship has haunted my tribe since Gran was a little girl. Katara explained as they walked through the ship. It was part of the Fire Nation's first attacks. I had friends all over the world, even in the Fire Nation, Aang stated. I never thought that they would lead a war, he says in a sad voice as he sits down on the floor. I'm sorry, Aang, Katara said, squatting beside him. Maybe somehow there's a bright side to all this. I did get to meet you, he says with a smile that made Katara blush slightly. Katara then smiled warmly at him while offering her hand. Come on, let's get out of here. Katara pulls him to his feet and they exit the room. A short time, she says, Aang, let's head back, this place is creepy. Aang ventures down yet another room with Katara in his trail. There, he trips over a thin rope, barring the entrance, thus trapping them. Huh! Man, I need to relearn to be aware of my surroundings, Aang said as the two of them ran back to the, now barred, door. Seems you were right about booby traps. The gears and engines of the shipwreck begin to power up and function. In shock, Katara and Aang follow the movements of the machines until suddenly, a flare is fired and explodes high in the sky. Aang notices a hole in the roof of the ship and takes a surprised Katara into his arms. Hold on tight. Ah! Katara screams as Aang enhances the power of his jump with his airbending to jump several feet into the air through the hole. After Aang land, he quickly turned to Katara. If we run to the village, we might lead the Fire Nation straight there. But if we don't go there and the Fire Nation goes there anyway, we won't be able to protect them, Aang states. What do you want to do? Let's go back, Katara states, and they start running back to the village. Aang and Katara quickly run towards the southern water tribe where the villagers are standing in the snow, waiting for them just outside the village. Children become overjoyed upon seeing Aang. Yay! Aang's back! The village kids yell in joy as some of them run over to him, while the others remain cheerful in the crowd. The adults in the crowd are, however, less welcoming. The children reach Aang and Katara and they crowd around him gleefully. Aang happily greets them back. Sokka breaks himself free out of the line of villagers and steps forward to face Aang. I knew it! Sokka says while pointing at Aang accusingly while going towards them. You signaled the Fire Navy with that flare. You're leading them straight to us, aren't you? Aang didn't do anything. Katara protests it was an accident. Yeah. We were on the ship and there was this booby trap, and while Aang began then paused and rubbed his head we boobied right into it. Katara, you shouldn't have gone on that ship. Kanna said now we could all be in danger. Don't blame Katara. Aang defended I brought her there. It's my fault. Aha! The traitor confesses. Sokka exclaims warriors, away from the enemy. The children begin to walk away. The foreigner is banished from our village. Sokka, you're making a mistake. Katara began. No, I'm keeping my promise to Dad. Sokka interrupts and then points at Aang. I'm protecting you from threats like him. Aang is not our enemy. Katara said fiercely but then continues in a calm voice. Don't you see? Aang's brought us something we haven't had in a long time, fun. She would have continued but was interrupted again. Fun? We can't fight firebenders with fun, Sokka said in an annoyed voice. Maybe not, but you can't fight them with children who only think of war. Aang said if you do that they might end up becoming exactly like the Fire Nation. Get out of our village! Now! Sokka says. Grandmother, please. Katara pleaded. Don't let Sokka do this. Katara, you knew going on that ship was forbidden. Kanna said. Sokka is right. I think it best if the airbender leaves. Fine. Then I'm banished too. Katara says and starts dragging Aang away. Come on Aang, let's go. Where do you think you're going? Sokka demanded. To find a waterbender. Katara exclaims. Aang is taking me to the North Pole. I am? Aang asked. Katara, would you really choose him over your tribe? Sokka asked and points at the water tribe. Your own family? This causes Katara to stop in her tracks. This isn't about choosing one over the other, Aang stated. Right now you are sending me away to protect yourselves, but the fact remains that the Fire Nation might be on its way, and if they were close enough they saw me and Katara leave the ship. This means that they saw someone from the water tribe with me and will assume that you are hiding an airbender. If you want to protect your village, you either need both of us to stay and help you defend, or you need both of us to leave so you can say that you banished Katara for interacting with a stranger and going to that ship. We will of course be seen leaving to lead them away from you, since an airbender is probably a better price than your village. Stop trying to sound like you care about this village, Sokka said in anger. Stop it, Sokka, he's right. Kanna said. We are letting fear cloud our judgment. Right now we need all the help we can get if the Fire Nation shows up. But Sokka began before thinking about what was said. Fine. Appa, you need to hide for a while. Since you haven't gotten your flying abilities back yet, you would not be of help, so I will take you someplace safe. Aang said, then turned around. I'll be back in a bit. A short while later, Sokka coaches the young boys to prepare for battle just outside the village. Alright, ready our defenses. Sokka states the Fire Nation could be on our shores any moment now. But I gotta, says a village boy while stopping and dancing around. And no potty breaks. Sokka interrupts him. Aang is petting Appa after finding a good spot for him to be. Appa grunts. Yeah, I like her too, and I'd better get back. He then sees a Fire Nation ship approaching the village from a distance. Man, they were closer than I thought, Aang says before hurrying back to the village. Sokka prepares for battle inside a water tribe tent. He dons gloves, boots and bindings and applies face paint. After necessary preparations, he puts his boomerang away on his back. He grabs his club and then glances at a candle that flickers before he exits. Sokka stands atop the wall facing the sea, while overlooking the foggy horizon. Suddenly a loud, cracking noise can be heard, getting the attention of everyone in the camp. The ground begins to quake and a rumbling sound is heard in the distance. At Sokka's feet, bits of the wall are cracking and breaking off. A mother carrying her child slowly backs away in fright. A watchtower on the wall is shaking under the pressure of the trembling and completely collapses. "Oh man!" Sokka says in disappointment at the fact that it collapsed so easily. Meanwhile, the citizens are beginning to flee from the scene. Katara runs up and looks up at her brother still standing atop the wall, and her look turns to one of horror as she sees an enormous shadow of a Fire Nation ship coming into view. "Oh man," Sokka says, this time in a dejected tone. The ship continues approaching the village, cutting through the icy sea. Soon the ship reaches the snowy shores and starts cutting through it, splintering the ground. Sokka looks terrified at the large ship. The ship's approach creates a large crack that quickly travels toward the village and through the wall. Meanwhile, Katara was helping her grandmother into a tent when she hears a frightened scream. She gasps in terror when she realizes that the sound came from a small boy, kneeling on the ground. The fisher is rapidly approaching him, but Katara quickly runs over and scoops up the child before the ground splinters underneath. She sets the child down again in front of a tent which he quickly enters, and then Katara turns back to view her brother. "Sokka, get out of the way!" Katara yells as she sees him still standing on the wall right in front of the ship. Sokka ignores her and instead raises his club in defense, ready to strike. Before he can make his move, however, the bow crumbles a large portion of the wall into snowy ruins. The snow slides downward, pushing Sokka several feet back before he lands to a halt. With a loud hiss of steam, the ship has come to a halt as well. The villagers curiously come out of hiding and are staring in complete shock at the large vessel. Katara looks at the ship with her mouth open and gasps. Sokka also gasps when he catches sight of the bow of the ship opening and creaking forward in a burst of steam, forming a walkway. He backs up and falls to the ground once the bow hits the ground with a loud thud. The villagers gather closer around for support, and several people even cover their eyes. Katara takes a step back upon noticing the shape of three figures cloaked in the mist. Prince Zuko emerges from the mist, two guards following close behind him. The villagers huddle together while Sokka kneels in the snow, ready to defend his tribe. Prince Zuko descends from the ship along with the two guards, while more soldiers start appearing behind them. Sokka lets out a battle cry and charges at the prince with his club ready to strike. When he reaches Zuko, the prince merely kicks the club to his left, and, without ever resting his leg on the ground, kicks Sokka over to his right, sending him into the snow where his head becomes trapped. The warrior desperately tries to free himself as Zuko continues on his way to the village, followed by 6 more men. Katara covers her mouth in shock upon witnessing her brother's quick defeat. Zuko approaches the group of villagers. First he goes to the right end of the line, then along the line to the other end. He stops in front of Katara, who's clutching Kanna. "Where are you hiding him?" Zuko says angrily while he surveys the crowd of villagers who fall completely silent. Without warning, he extends his arm out into the crowd and grabs Kanna, holding her by the hood of her parka. He'd be about this age, master of all elements, he states before he shoves Kanna forcefully back into the crowd. The elderly woman shudders in fear and embraces Katara, while Katara shoots an angrily glare at Zuko. Receiving no response, Zuko swings his arm out and releases a blast of fire. However, a gust of wind blasts it to the side so that it doesn't come near the villagers. "Who did that?" Zuko shouts. Meanwhile, Sokka, who's lost most of his war paint at this point, runs over and picks up his club. He lets out another battle cry as he charges toward the prince's back. Zuko swiftly turns around just as Sokka approaches. He ducks under Sokka's wide swing and hurls the warrior forward. Sokka lands on his rear in the snow when another gust of wind sends Zuko backwards. Sokka spins to the side and tosses his boomerang at the enemy, who barely manages to avoid getting hit by the weapon. Zuko growls in anger at the near hit. One of the village boys tosses Sokka a spear. "Show no fear!" the boy shouts. Sokka handily catches the weapon and charges Zuko once more, but Zuko breaks off pieces of the spear with his forearms, pulls the remains of the weapon out of Sokka's hands only for both him and Sokka to be pushed apart by another gust of wind. Zuko gets back up only for the boomerang to strike him on the back of his helmet with a loud cling. He is momentarily pushed forward by the unexpected blow. Zuko rearranges his helmet and growls at Sokka. The boomerang has plummeted into the ground in front of Sokka's feet. Enraged, Zuko readies 2 fire daggers. At this point Aang, who had been hiding in the shadows and used his wind bending to support and protect since Zuko had first tried to use fire to scare the villagers, decided that it was time to take an active role. He jumps from the side and strikes Zuko hard to the back of his knees with his staff, causing Zuko to fall backward, while Aang himself speeds past, before making a somersault and landing in a crouch. Meanwhile Zuko spins around a few times before coming to a halt in front of his men with his head in the snow and his helmet landing on his rear. "Hey, Katara." "Hey, Sokka," Aang states as if he had just arrived, though all the villagers had known he was there for a while since the wind had been far too much in their favor. "Hi, Aang. Thanks for coming," Sokka states in an annoyed tone. Aang looks back at the Fire Nation soldiers, where Zuko just got back on his feet again. Upon his signal, his men spread out, surrounding Aang while Zuko assumes a fighting stance. Aang had been in his crouching fighting stance since his arrival, his staff held firmly in both his hands slightly in front of him. He keeps that position as he is being surrounded by the soldiers. He then spins in place, sweeping his staff along the ground which showers the men with snow. He then slams the ground, sending a rush of snow at Zuko, who braces for the impact. After being sprayed with snow, and heating it up so it would melt off, Zuko looks up angrily. "Looking for me?" Aang states. "You're the airbender?" Zuko states in shock. "You're the Avtar?" Aang just resumes his fighting stance. "Aang?" Katara says, confused, since earlier he had asked her to keep that a secret. "No way," Sokka says. Zuko and Aang start moving about in a circular pattern, both awaiting the attack of the other. "I've spent years preparing for this encounter. Training, meditating," Zuko states while getting progressively angrier. "You're just a child." "Well, you're just a teenager," Aang states calmly. Zuko launches a series of fire blasts at Aang, who defends himself by twirling his staff, dissipating the flames. Zuko attacks Aang again, causing Aang to realize that the villagers are right behind him. Zuko fires another blast at Aang, who twirls his staff once again to ward the attack off, but realizes that currently he is endangering the villagers, and since his main goal was to protect them, his current actions were counterproductive. Therefore he placed his staff in the ground, causing Zuko to stop attacking. "If I go with you," Aang begins, "will you promise to leave everyone alone?" After a brief moment of hesitation, Zuko erects himself and nods in agreement. Aang is apprehended by Zuko's men, who take his staff. Katara runs forward as they lead Aang away. "No! Aang, don't do this," she says. "Don't worry, Katara. It'll be okay," Aang said before he gets a shove which causes him to gasp, which in turn causes Katara's face to contort with sadness and fright. "Take care of Appa for me until I get back. Set a course for the Fire Nation," Zuko says as he walks up the walkway in front of Aang. "I'm going home." Aang stops at the top of walkway and looks back at Katara, smiling weakly while surrounded by Fire Nation soldiers. Katara, who looks up at him with tears in her eyes as the bow lifts up and hides Aang from changing back to a shot of Aang, who now frowns as the bow rises and is locked into place with a thud. Katara is standing on the edge of the southern shores looking out into the distance, while talking to her brother behind her. "We have to go after that ship, Sokka," Katara states in determination, as Sokka moves around behind her carrying some packs by her. "Aang saved our tribe, now we have to save him." "Katara," Sokka began, but Katara interrupts him. "Why can't you realize that he's on our side?" Katara states while making arm gestures to emphasize her words. "If we don't help him, no one will. I know you don't like Aang, but we owe him and—" "Katara!" Sokka interrupts her, slightly annoyed. "Are you gonna talk all day, or are you coming with me?" Sokka then gestures to a canoe floating in the water. Katara immediately grins and runs to him. "Sokka!" she exclaims as she gives him a hug. "Get in, we're going to save your boyfriend," Sokka says. Katara blushes briefly before stating, "He's not my—" "Whatever," Sokka says while shrugging. "What do you two think you're doing?" Kanna's voice comes from behind them. The two siblings turn around, look at her and try to act as innocently as possible, though Sokka's broad grin makes it less convincing. "You'll need these," Kanna then says with a warm smile while holding up their sleeping bags. You have a long journey ahead of you. The siblings glance at each other in surprise. Kanna then walks over to face Katara. It's been so long since I've had hope, but you brought it back to life, my little waterbender. She says and hugs Katara, and who at the end takes the sleeping bag out of her hands. Kanna then turns to Sokka and you, my brave warrior, be nice to your sister. She tells him and hugs him. Yeah, okay, Gran. He says while awkwardly patting her back, then smiles broadly as she releases him. Aang is the Avtar. Kanna states he's the world's only chance. You both found him for a reason. Now your destinies are intertwined with his. The two siblings look at each other uneasily. There's no way we're going to catch a warship with a canoe, Katara states while pointing at it. She then hears a growl and looks up to see Appa approaching Appa. She exclaims happily and runs over to the bison. You just love taking me out of my comfort zone, don't you? Sokka says. Aang, Zuko, Iroh and some of Zuko's men are standing on deck. Aang's hands are bound behind his back while Zuko holds Aang's staff. This staff will make an excellent gift for my father, Zuko states while inspecting the staff. I suppose you wouldn't know of fathers being raised by monks. He then turns to the soldiers. Take the Avtar to the prison hold, and turning to Iroh and handing him the staff, take this to my quarters. Iroh takes the staff and looks at it for a moment while Zuko walks away. Hey, you mind taking this to his quarters for me? Iroh says to one of the soldiers, who accepts the staff. Iroh then walks away. Aang is pushed forward by two of the soldiers and he grunts as they roughly shove him ahead. As Aang is being led to the stairs that go below deck, he sees Iroh and the firebender carrying his staff walking toward a door leading to the upper deck. Aang and his guards begins descending a staircase leading to compartment beneath the deck. When they walk through the corridor at the bottom of the stairs, Aang has one soldier before him and one following after him. So, I guess you've never seen an airbender before. Aang states, I bet I could take you both with my hands tied behind my back. Silence. The guard before him states. The party stops and Aang observes the soldier in front of him preparing to unlock a door. As the guard in front of him begins to unlock the cell, Aang inhales deeply and unleashes a powerful breath, stunning both of them. The firebender before him slams into the door, subsequently knocked out from the impact. Aang is sent several feet back, slamming into the guard behind him. The both fly back even further, where they crash into the stairs. The soldier behind Aang is knocked out by the impact, while Aang propels himself onto the deck and kicks open the door. He saw his staff being taken through using airbending. He quickly runs down the hallway, panting heavily. He tosses a frightened look over his shoulder, afraid that he's being followed. Katara and Sokka sit atop Appa, who still hasn't gone airborne, but is instead swimming in the water. Katara is sitting on top of Appa's head, while Sokka rests in the saddle. Go. Fly. Sokka states in an unamused voice. Katara glances annoyed at her brother. Soar. Sokka says, completely ignoring her. Please, Appa. Katara pleads with Appa but only gets a friendly growl in return. We need your help. Aang needs your help. Up. Ascend. Elevate. Sokka tries unhelpfully. Sokka doesn't believe you can fly, but I do, Appa. Katara states as she strokes Appa. Come on, don't you want to save Aang? Appa just grunts in reply. What was it that kid said? Sokka says to himself, yeehaw? Hup hup? Wahoo? Yip yip? Sokka startles at the sudden movement that last command brought with it, as it seemingly prompts Appa. He grunts and beats the water with his tail. After what appears to be a brief running start, he takes flight and soars through the air. You did it, Sokka. Katara states happily. He's flying! He's flying! Katara, Sokka says ecstatically while looking over the rim of the saddle, but stops talking when he looks at Katara and sees her smirk. He then tries to play it cool. I mean, big deal. He's flying. Aang is frantically running through the corridors. He stops in his tracks and yells out when he encounters 3 soldiers standing with swords drawn in the middle of the corridor. You haven't seen my staff around, have you? He asks them. The 3 men prepare to attack him, but before they can make a move, Aang jumps to the wall and kicks of it towards the head of the nearest soldier, using him as a springboard to get to the next guard, where he repeats the action, effectively knocking out all three of them. "Thanks anyway," Aang states as he continues racing through the hallways of the ship. When he rows another deck, he encounters another guard. The soldier fires a blast at Aang, who leaps forward. Aang somersaults over the soldier and uses the sharp tip of his helmet to cut his bindings, thus freeing himself. The soldier falls over from the impact, and Aang stops briefly to kick him in the face, knocking him out as well. Aang then proceeds down the hall, opening doors leading to various compartments of the ship. Upon opening a door, he finds Iroh sleeping blissfully, snoring. "Sorry," he whispers as he quietly closes the door. Aang runs past an open doorway only to slow down and trace his way back upon catching sight of his glider. His face brightens upon recognition of the object, but before he goes through the door, he uses airbending to open the door all the way, getting a groan of pain from the person standing behind it. He quickly runs in and grabs the staff and leaves before Zuko can regain his bearings. Soon he arrives at the hatch to the control room and uses airbending to quickly open it, and whirlwind himself up through the opening. Aang runs across the room, leaping over a table and past the soldier in the room, who looks up in surprise. Aang exits the room and runs onto the upper deck of the ship. Aang happily spreads his arms and welcomes the fresh air. He throws his staff over the balcony, which opens into a glider, and he quickly jumps after it, grabs it, and begins soaring away. However, before he can get away, someone grabs a hold of his leg, and he looks down to see Zuko holding on to his ankle. Aang's expression of triumph turns into one of despair as he begins losing altitude, struggling to maintain the weight of that extra, unexpected person. The two plummet down to the lower deck of the ship and land with a crash. They bounce a few times before coming to a halt. Aang's glider closes again to a staff. Both lie on the deck for a moment. Zuko's eyes narrow in anger. Zuko begins rising, a look of persistence on his face. Aang rises and assumes a fighting stance, looking very unsure of himself. "Looks like I underestimated you," Zuko says. "Wouldn't be the first time that has happened to me," Aang replies, thinking back to some of the fights that he had gone through when he was still Naruto. "Well, I'll be careful not to repeat the mistake," Zuko replied. Zuko starts attacking, but Aang manages to deflect the fire-bending attack by spinning his glider around like a baton. However, he propels himself by accident into the air and lands on the ledge of the deck. He leans precariously over the side, unsteadily balancing himself, but manages to regain his balance only for Zuko to fire another blast at him. He twirls his glider again to deflect the attack. 2 more blasts are fired his way before he loses his grip on his glider and the object spins away. The staff falls several feet away. Aang ducks, spins and leaps out of the way of blasts and lands on the very ledge, struggling to keep his balance. A growl then distracts both fighters. Aang averts his gaze and catches sight of Appa heading towards the ship. "What is that?" Zuko asks. "Appa?" Aang states in an ecstatic voice. He then turned back to Zuko in time to see him hurl more fire blasts his way. Aang holds up his hands in defense, but the last blast seemingly knocks him out cold, and he falls backward off the ship into the water, where he slowly sinks. Aang hears Katara's voice calling out to him, and almost immediately afterwards feels his Avtar link activating, and he loses control of his moments as he opens his, now glowing, eyes, and he frowns angrily. He steadies himself in the water and begins swiveling around, a waterspout forming around him. He rockets upward and erupts from the surface, riding a humongous spinning water vortex. Zuko looks up in horror when he sees an enormous shadow cover his ship, only to see snake-like water vortex with Aang as its head. Aang guides the vortex down so that he lands on the deck, and then he summons some water from behind him. He then brings his hands around behind his head. The water swirls around him, forming a protective circle, before spreading outward, knocking Zuko and several soldiers off their feet. Zuko falls over the edge of the ship with a cry of surprise. Meanwhile, Sokka and Katara are leaning over the side of Appa's saddle, watching in shock. "Did you see what he just did?" Katara asked, surprised since she didn't think Aang could use waterbending yet. "Now that was some waterbending," Sokka states in an impressed tone. Aang then on the deck as he collapses onto the ground from exhaustion, his eyes and tattoos ceasing to glow. Appa growls and lands on the deck and speeds up, getting to the ship. Just before they land, Aang starts to slowly sit up, though his movements are jerky. Katara and Sokka slide down and quickly run toward Aang. Aang, are you okay? Katara asks as she kneels down beside him. Hey, Katara. Hey, Sokka. Aang says weakly, thanks for coming. Well, I couldn't let you have all the glory, Sokka replies. I dropped my staff, Aang states. Got it, Sokka says before getting up, running over, grabbing a hold of the staff and trying to lift the staff. This effort is impaired, however, because Zuko's hand is firmly gripping the other end. Sokka appears horrified as Zuko attempts to pull himself upward onto the deck. The two struggle for a bit, and then Sokka pokes Zuko repeatedly in the head with the end of the staff. Zuko grunts and falls backward as he lets go of the staff. He falls off the side of the ship, but manages to grasp the anchor chain. Ha! That's from the water tribe, Sokka exclaims. He then looks over to see Appa rise from a puddle of water after Katara helped Aang to climb atop his head. Katara still stands beside the large beast while Aang lies on top of his head. Katara sees 3 of the soldiers, who are knocked down by Aang's water attack, rise and menacingly approach her. Katara takes a step back and then slowly and precariously bends a stream of water from the puddle, causing the men to slow down and gasp in surprise. She swings her arms around in an attempt to whip them, however, only succeeds in freezing a channel of water behind her on the deck, encasing Sokka's legs in ice in the process. Katara! Sokka complains. The soldiers resume their approach. Katara turns around, her back facing them, and draws another stream of water. She closes her eyes tightly, swings her arms behind her, and turns around to see one of the soldiers completely frozen in a casing of ice, his arm extended outward to her, still twitching in effort to grab her. She backs away slowly, but then turns around and quickly runs toward Appa. She begins mounting Appa while Sokka is trying to cut himself free by smashing his icy chains with his boomerang. Hurry up, Sokka! Katara yells. I'm just a guy with a boomerang, Sokka mutters to himself as he frees his left foot. I didn't ask for all this flying and magic. He manages to break free and races up Appa's tail. Yip yip. Yip yip! He yells as he jumps into the saddle. Appa grunts and takes flight, flying past the cabin of the ship. Iroh emerges on deck, having just woken up from a nap. Iroh rubs his eyes and stares up in surprise. While Appa is flying away, Iroh quickly helps Zuko back to the ship, and together they fire a blast of fire after Appa, but Aang redirects it with an air blast from his staff, causing it to go into a nearby cliffside. The impact causes an avalanche of snow and ice to begin falling. Zuko looks up in horror at the event, raising one arm protectively. The front of the ship becomes buried in a mass of snow and ice while Appa climbs higher and higher. The trio laugh as they escape successfully. Aang waves goodbye as Appa disappears around the cliff. Zuko bends over in rage on the deck with Iroh erecting himself behind him. Good news for the Fire Lord. Iroh states the Fire Nation's greatest threat is just a little kid. Zuko lifts his head and rises while his uncle is speaking. That kid, uncle, just did this, he states in suppressed anger while indicating towards the damage done to the ship. I won't underestimate him again. He then yells to the soldiers while pointing at the piles of snow covering the front of the ship. Dig this ship out and follow them. He turns around to see the soldiers working on freeing the once Katara froze. As soon as you're done with that, he adds, slightly embarrassed. Appa soars lazily in the sky while the sun is beginning to set. Aang is perched on the rim of the saddle, while Sokka and Katara sit at the back of it. How did you do that? With the water? Katara asked. I thought you didn't know waterbending, but that was the most amazing waterbending I've ever seen. Aang, I don't know how I did it exactly, Aang said quietly while having his head slightly downcast and sitting on the edge of the saddle. In a way, I didn't actually do it. Being the Avatar, I have a link to all previous avatars, and when I am in danger they can guide me in order to protect myself. However, I have only marginal control in that state, so I fear becoming a danger to those around me. Why did you ask me to keep you being the Avatar's secret only to reveal it to everyone moments later? Katara then asked. Because I realized that being an airbender people, especially from the Fire Nation, would assume I was the Avatar anyway, Aang stated. So people hunting me wouldn't stop just because I pretended to be a normal airbender. By admitting to be the Avatar, however, I can give people hope and hopefully gain allies faster. Well, if we want to give people hope, you will need to master the different elements, starting with water, right? Katara asked. That's what the monks told me, Aang said. After that comes earth, and then fire. So let's go to the North Pole, where you can master waterbending, Katara stated. This made Aang smile. We can learn it together, he states happily, which makes Katara smile and blush slightly. She quickly turns and faces her brother and Sokka. I'm sure you'll get to knock some firebender heads on the way, she states. I'd like that. Sokka states contently, I'd really like that. Then we're in this together, Katara states. Aang pulls out a scroll, alright, but before we learn waterbending, we have some serious business to attend to, he states, and uses airbending to situate himself onto the saddle and unrolls the scroll, revealing a map of the world. Here, here, and here. While stating this, he points to 3 locations, 2 in the Earth Kingdom, 1 in Air Nomad territory. What's there? Katara asks. Well, the first place is the Southern Air Temple. I need to see it for myself, just to be sure, Aang states. Then way over here, we'll surf on the backs of giant koi fish. This causes Katara and Sokka stare at him in wonder. Then in the forest over here we'll ride the hog monkeys. The siblings glance at each other. They don't like people riding them, but that's what makes it fun. Aang sits on the Appa's head and checks the knots that tie the reins to Appa's horns. Katara is sitting on the saddle and is fiddling with their luggage. I don't know whether I should be excited or apprehensive of going back to the Air Temple, Aang said. I remember it as being one of the most beautiful places in the world, but that was 100 years and a war ago. I wish I could say something to make it better, but I don't really know what to expect either, Katara admitted. Are you sure you want to go? I need to know whether it's really gone, Aang said, and there's a place I need to visit. Okay, Katara said. Anyway, I've been meaning to ask you something, but since it is connected to your other secret, I needed to ask away from Sokka, she said, pointing to the Sokka who was currently sleeping in a sleeping bag not far from them. Okay, I'll leave 2 clones, one looking like you, in case he wakes up, while we go over there, Aang said, pointing at a beach some way away from them. He then made 2 shadow clones and had one henge into Katara. I don't know how comfortable I am with your ability to look exactly like me, but I'll just ignore it for now since it's helpful, Katara stated. Since I only based it on the basic knowledge I have of your looks, it really only looks like you on the surface, Aang stated. The amount of knowledge needed to make it a true copy of you makes it unrealistic to even try. They soon arrive on the beach and Aang turns to Katara expectantly. I was wondering, Katara began, whether you could try and teach me some of the abilities you had in the other world where you originally came from. Wow, that wasn't the question I was expecting, Aang said. I thought it would be more along the line of asking me to prove that I was from another world. I have never heard of anyone, Avatar or not, who could create copies of themselves, Katara stated, plus my instincts told me that you were telling the truth. Fair enough, I guess, Aang said. As for teaching you, I definitely intend to try, but I don't want you to get your hopes up. The rules of nature in your world might be vastly different than they are in mine, which could prevent most if not all my abilities to be learned. But at least 2 of your abilities work, Katara stated. Yes, for me, Aang countered, which just might be a side effect of me coming from a world where I could do this. But you'll try and teach me, Katara said hopefully. Of course I will, you're one of my precious people after all, Aang stated, making Katara blush. Learning this might save your life someday. Will we need to keep this a secret from Sokka? Katara then asks. No, I will trust him with the secret. Aang said he might like poking fun at almost anything, but I believe I can trust him with my secret. Thank you, Katara said, glad that she didn't have to keep it a secret from her brother. I do have something else I wanted to talk to you about, Aang stated, something personal. What is it? Katara said, a little apprehensive. You see, the thing is, Aang stated, then took a deep breath. I like you a lot, Katara blushed, but the thing is, I am the last airbender. If I do not get children who are airbenders, then that bending form might be lost forever. The fact that you are a waterbender makes it possible that any children I had with you could become waterbenders rather than airbenders. Therefore my options are limited. He took another breath. I could follow my heart, and possibly ruin the world because the Avatar circle will get broken the next time an airbender is needed. The second option I can think of is finding a non-bender to love, that way any children we have, provided they have bending abilities, will have a high chance of being airbenders. The last option that I can think of is having multiple partners, since that would increase the chances of one of them having an airbender child. Katara thought about it for a moment. Why exactly is it you are telling me this now? She asked. Because I wanted you to know. Aang said, my heart is screaming at me to only love you and to close of my heart to any other girl. However, I know I couldn't live with myself if this would eventually lead to the loss of the Avatar and perhaps the destruction of this world. Therefore you need to know that if you ever want to pursue a relationship with me, then there will have to be others, and I will love these others as well. Aang took a deep breath. If you found out later, I fear that you would come to hate me. I don't know what to say, Aang, Katara responds after a moment's thought. You don't need to say anything, Katara. Aang said, I didn't tell you to force you to make a decision now. He then looks back to where Appa is. Anyway, let's go back and wake Sokka so we can go to the temple. As they start going back, Aang thinks, why can't I shake the feeling that Hinata is somehow responsible for me thinking of the third option. When they get back to Appa, Aang walks over to Sokka. Wake up, Sokka. Air temple, here we come. Sleep now. Temple later. Sokka states and turns away from Aang and falls asleep, snoring as soon as his eyes close. Aang blinks in surprise only to smile mischievously a moment later. Aang grabs a small, thin stick. Sokka! Wake up! Aang cries out in alarm and moves the stick up and down the sleeping bag, only touching with the tip of the stick. There's a prickle snake in your sleeping bag. Sokka lazily opens one eye before what was said break through his sleepy stupor. He yells in horror, quickly rising and hopping around while still in the sleeping bag. Get it off! Get it off! After 2 hops, Sokka slams flat to the ground right at Katara's feet. Katara giggles at Sokka's fall while Sokka's face contorts in anger. Great! You're awake! Let's go! Aang states happily. Appa is flying above the clouds towards the Patola mountain range. Aang is sitting on its head while Katara on the front part the saddle with Sokka sitting in the rear part. Sokka's stomach then growls and Sokka gets a look of dismay on his face. Hey stomach? Be quiet, alright? He says to it in annoyance. I'm trying to find us some food. Sokka starts to go through the luggage and gets out a bag. He looks at it for a moment, while it sways in the wind. With his tongue out of his mouth full anticipation, he sticks his hand in the bag and starts to go through it. He looks surprised for a moment, but then quickly turns the bag upside down to pour the contents into his hand, which turns out to only be a few crumbs of blubbered seal jerky. Hey! Who ate all of my blubbered seal jerky? Sokka asks the others accusingly. Oh, that was food? Aang asks in surprise. Then continues in a happy tone, I used it to start the campfire last night. Sorry. You what? Sokka asked in shock. No wonder the flames smelled so good. At that point Appa starts to ascend up to some mountains. The Patola mountain range. Aang declares, we're almost there. Time to see whether the Fire Nation really managed to attack the airbenders or not. One thing that is bugging me is the fact that you should only be able to reach the temple via Sky Bison, so how would the Fire Nation have gotten here? Still, don't get your hopes up, okay, Aang? Katara said. Hope for the best, but prepare for the worst, Aang said sadly. That is one way to put it, Katara agreed. Appa begins his ascent up the side of a mountain. Yip yip! Aang calls out as they raise up higher and spiral upwards around a mountain to find the optimal place to get the rest of the way. Soon Appa finds it and flies upwards through some clouds. Moments later they fly over a ridge and a large temple comes into view. There it is. Aang states, the Southern Air Temple. Aang, it's amazing! Katara says in awe. Aang is visibly excited at the sight of the temple. We're home, buddy! We're home! He states, though his eyes have some apprehension in them. Soon they arrive at a platform near the part leading to the air temple and they have Appa land. After making sure Appa is comfortable, they start making their way up the path with Aang running at the front, excitedly looking back at the 2 siblings that are following behind him. So when do I get something to eat? Sokka asks Katara as they walk, Aang being outside of hearing range, while he clutches his stomach with both hands. The bags under his eyes are darkened and he has a very annoyed look on his face. You're lucky enough to be one of the first outsiders to ever visit an airbender temple, and all you can think about is food? Katara asks in an irritated voice as they walk up to Aang, who's waiting for them at the next corner. I'm just a simple guy, with simple needs, Sokka simply states moments before they reach Aang, who is pointing at something in front of him. So that's where my friends and I would play airball, he says. The siblings join him to see a stadium consisting of many tall poles. And over there, he continues, pointing further to the right, is where the bison would sleep, But then he stops with a sigh and a sad expression on his face as he looks at the deserted remains of his home. What's wrong? Katara asks, though she already had an idea of what was bothering him. This place used to be full of monks and lemurs and bison. Now there's just a bunch of weeds, he states in sadness. I can't believe how much things have changed. At this point, Katara and Sokka quickly approach Aang. As they pull up beside him, they see the saddened look on his face. So, this airball game, Sokka says cheerfully, trying to distract Aang. How do you play? Katara smiles at her brother, and Aang's face clears up. He smiles too as he looks at Sokka from the corners of his eyes. A while later, Sokka looking standing on a pole in the airball court with a look of concentrated while guarding a goal. On the other side of the court, Aang also stands on one of the tall poles, suspending a hollow ball in the air with airbending. He lets the ball roll over his shoulders, tosses it from side to side, and then lazily tosses it up in the air. He looks and smiles innocently at Sokka with his hands behind his back and closes his eyes. Sokka looks surprised at the upwards movement of the ball but quickly refocuses on Aang just as he opens one eye as the ball comes down again. The airbender jumps up and kicks the ball away with a powerful air swipe. It rapidly shoots across the poles, changing direction as it crashes into several poles, but steadily moving closer towards Sokka's goal. Sokka opens his mouth in shock, then he grunts as the ball hits him right in the stomach. The speed of impact sends Sokka and the ball flying backwards, right through the rotation door of the goal behind him and crashing into the snow behind the goal. Aang laughs as he jumps up in joy. Aang 7, he states, then forms a 0 with his hands. Sokka 0. Sokka lying in a pile of twigs, one of these lying on his head while he looks a bit miserable. Katara stand in the background looking at her brother. Making him feel better is putting me in a world of hurt, Sokka says while he erects himself. Then his eyes go wide when he spots a Fire Nation helmet lying in the snow. It has been battered by the elements, and shows signs of cracks and burns. He looks up at his sister. Katara, check this out, he says and points at the helmet. Fire Nation, Katara states sadly. We should tell him, Sokka says. Aang, Katara yells out, there's something you need to see. Aang runs to them from the airball court, still playing with the hollow ball. Okay, he yells while getting closer to them. As he draws closer, Katara's determination to tell him vanishes as she realizes that showing him will destroy any hope he has left, something she does not wish to do. She glances at the helmet and then back at the approaching Aang. Suddenly she shifts her weight and brings her arms up. With one swift movement she swings her arms back, manipulating the overhanging snow to fall down, obscuring the helmet and Sokka from sight. What is it? Aang asks as he reaches them. Sokka brushes the snow off his head and looks at his sister. Innocently holding her hands behind her back, Katara says, just a new waterbending move I learned. Aang looks at her skeptically, getting the feeling that she is hiding something. Then he decides to ignore it for now. Nice one. But enough practicing, he states, regaining some of his excitement, and starts to walk away from them. We have a whole temple to see. You know, you can't protect him forever, Sokka says to Katara while brushing off the last of the snow. Katara sadly slants her eyes and walks after Aang. The trio soon arrive in a courtyard with a fountain in the middle. The water in the fountain is frozen. Sokka and Katara stand at the entrance of the courtyard, while Aang runs up ahead excitedly. Katara, firebenders were here, Sokka tells Katara sternly. You can't pretend they weren't. Katara just walks past her brother. Sokka pulls up beside Katara and she starts talking. I can for Aang's sake. She states if he finds out the Fire Nation invaded his home, he'll be devastated. Hey guys. Aang calls out while standing in front of a statue, an elderly man with a mustache and a distinct round necklace sitting in lotus with his fists bumped to each other in front of him. I want you to meet somebody, he states while pointing at the statue. Who's that? Sokka asks. Monk Gyatso, the greatest airbender in the world. Aang states with pride, he taught me everything I know about airbending in this world. Aang bows to the statue while Sokka looks slightly confused at Aang saying this world rather than the world, but decided to ignore it for now. As Aang continues bowing to the statue, Katara realizes that he is lost in a memory of Gyatso. When Aang erects himself with a sad look upon his face, Katara places a hand on his shoulder. You must miss him, she says in understanding. Yeah, Aang says, then start to walk away. Where are you going? Katara asked curiously. Aang starts walking up some stairs that lead to a corridor behind the statue. He looked back while answering. The Air Temple Sanctuary, he says. There's someone I'm ready to meet. Aang then enters the hallway. Katara looks questioningly at Sokka, who just shrugs. They both start walking after Aang. Together they walk down the corridor, Aang slightly in front of the others. The round symbol of intertwined air currents, the national symbol of the air nomads, is embedded in the floor of the corridor, surrounded by two square shapes that form some sort of sun together. Soon the trio reach the entrance of the Air Temple Sanctuary. The door has a combination of metal-colored pipes and 3 blue, rolled-up, pipes that are similar looking and arranges like the symbol for airbending on it. The large wooden door is framed by the branches of an old tree standing on the left of it, and the hallway is illuminated by sunlight that falls through little, round windows. But Aang, no one could have survived in there for 100 years, Katara says as they reach the door. It's not impossible, Aang points out, then spreads his arms. I survived in the iceberg for that long. Good point, Katara said while touching her chin with a finger. Aang glances hopeful at her over his shoulder. Katara, whoever's or whatever's in there might help figure out this Avatar thing, he states. And whoever's in there might have, Sokka says, completely ignoring the whatever's part and annoying Katara, who had a pretty good idea of what he was going to say, a medley of delicious, cured meats. He continues, drooling. Full anticipation and longing, Sokka charges the door, but it won't budge and he just smacks into it, head first. He quickly turns around and puts his back to it, trying to push the giant door open. When the door doesn't move, he sighs, slides down disappointed and rests up against the door. I don't suppose you have a key? Sokka asks Aang. The key, Sokka, is airbending, Aang states, and then he takes a deep breath. He spreads his arms and thrusts them forward, sending an air current into both of the tubes on the door. One air current is sent through the right side and travels through the pipe. When it reaches the end, the wind makes one of the blue curled tube turn around. When it does, the tube changes colors to purple and the wind blows out like a horn. The process is repeated for the other 2 blue tubes as well. When the 3 blue tubes have turned and become purple, the door unlocks and slowly starts to open. When the door is completely open, Aang raises his hand beside his mouth. Hello? He yells, slowly entering the sanctuary. Anyone home? He tries again. Sokka and Katara walk in behind Aang. Together the 3 of them venture further down into the sanctuary. The only light comes from the open door behind them and illuminates the room with bluish light. They stop and Sokka holds a hand to his brow to look up ahead. Switch to an overview shot of the trio as they stand in the light that comes in through the door. Before them are a large amount of statues of people, lined up in a circular pattern. They start to walk through them, curiously looking around. Sokka halts before one of them. Statues? That's it? He asks in disappointment. Where's the meat? Meanwhile, Aang and Katara have also stopped and are looking up at another statue. Who are all of these people? Katara asks. I'm not sure, Aang states, but it feels like I know them somehow. Look, he says, pointing at the statue of a man with airbending mastery tattoos in front of him. That one's an airbender. Katara points at the statue of a male dressed in water tribe clothes next to the airbender. And this one's a waterbender. She looks at the other statues around them. They're lined up in a pattern: air, water, earth, and fire, she says as she points at the respective statues. That's the Avatar cycle, Aang states. Of course. They're avatars, Katara states in understanding. All these people are your past lives, Aang. Wow. There are a lot more than I thought there would be, Aang said. To know just how many souls were part of the Avatar link was frightening to him, since he only had minimum control in the Avatar state. Ignoring the fact that the people controlling him were good people, it was far too similar to QB taking him over. Aang starts to walk down the circular pattern, while stands next to Sokka, who has his arms crossed. Past lives? Sokka says skeptically, as Aang stops before a statue. Katara, you really believe in that stuff? It's true, Katara says, looking at the statue of an elderly man with a beard that is in front of Aang. When the Avatar dies, he's reincarnated into the next nation in the cycle. Technically, it is a link to past souls of the Avatar that is passed on, not one soul in particular. Aang speculates aloud, otherwise all avatars should be almost the same, especially when the link fully manifests itself, and I really don't think that is the case. But it does give me a close connection with all of the previous avatar that gives the impression of having shared the essay. As he says this, he notices the eyes of the statue in front of him gleam for a second, which causes him to stop talking and look at it, completely mesmerized. Katara walks up behind him, grabs his shoulders and shakes him a bit. Aang! Snap out of it, she says loudly and looks at him worriedly while he smiles at the statue. Huh! Aang says in a daze. Katara curiously follows his gaze and looks at the statue as well. Who is that? She asks. That's Avatar Roku. Aang states, the avatar before me. Sokka walks up them. You were a firebender? Sokka asks. No wonder I didn't trust you when you first met. Katara ignores him and instead looks more closely at the statue. There's no writing. She says, how do you know his name? I'm not sure, Aang states, but most likely the link told me. You just couldn't get any weirder, Sokka states with an irritated growl and a crossing of his arms. The trio startles and stares with big eyes in front of them when they hear something. They turn around. In the blue light that comes in through the door, a long-eared shadow of another being can be seen approaching them. Katara and Aang hide behind one statue while Sokka hides behind another, holding his club ready. The shadow creeps closer. Katara clutched her teeth in fright while Aang looks in front of him, trying to figure out what it could be. Sokka holds his hand to his mouth as he addresses them. Firebender. Nobody make a sound, Sokka says. You're making a sound, Katara states in irritation. Sokka puts his finger before his mouth and makes a shhhh sound. Katara looks scared in front of her again. Sokka raises his club. That firebender won't know what hit him. He whispers and stands up. Sokka steps from behind the statue when he feels the being is close enough, his club at the ready, but lowers it as soon as he sees that it is just a small animal. Aang and Katara peek form behind their statue as well. Aang recognizes it as a flying lemur. The creature sits down and lowers his ears, blinking at the threesome. Lemur, Aang says excitedly. Dinner, Sokka exclaims while drooling. The animal pricks his ears and slightly tilts his head. Don't listen to him, Aang tells the lemur in a reassuring voice. You're going to be my new pet. He then glares at Sokka. Meanwhile, Sokka is still drooling and says in a challenging tone, not if I get him first. Sokka stretches out his hand while he excitedly lunges himself at the animal from behind the statue. Aang runs up at the lemur as well. The lemur arcs his back in fright, his ears, hair and tail standing upright as the snatching hands of the boys draw closer. It startles, quickly turns around and makes a break for it. Sokka barely misses the animal and falls down. Aang nimbly avoids tripping as well by using Sokka's head as a stepping stone. Sokka quickly gets up and runs after Aang and the lemur as they exit the sanctuary. Wait! Come back! Aang yells as he follows the lemur down the hallway. I want to eat you! Sokka yells out. Aang and Sokka slides around the corner, continuing their pursuit. Sokka passes Aang and shoves him back, taking the lead. Aang pulls up next to him again, so Sokka takes out his club and takes a swing at Aang's legs. Aang nimbly avoids the club and uses his airbending to run on the side of the wall, laughing loudly with amusement. Aang runs up ahead and then returns to running on the floor again. He quickly turns around and shoots an airball at Sokka, which knocks his legs from underneath him. Sokka flips in the air before smacking face first on the ground, his hood falling over his head as he lands. The lemur exits the corridor and sits on the ledge of the balcony, looking back at the approaching Aang. He pricks his ears again and takes flight with a scared look on his face. Aang briefly glances over to see if Sokka is still following. He then exits the hallway and, without slowing down, jumps over the ledge of the balcony, behind the lemur. The airbender turns in the air and uses some of the rocks to break his freefall, jumping from one rock to the other. When Sokka reaches the balcony, he stops there while looking over the rim. "Hey! No fair!" he yells out. Aang is free-falling again with his mouth wide open in a smile and his eyes slightly squinted and watering by the speed of his fall. The lemur landed on the ground at the bottom of the cliff. Aang quickly used airbending to slow his fall. When he landed on the ground, he jumped forward in an attempt to catch the lemur. The lemur jumps out of the way and runs through some ripped drapes, which once formed a tent. "Hey! Come back!" Aang says as he pushes the decaying curtain of drapes out of the way and happily looks around. "Come on out, little lemur! That hungry guy won't bother you anymore," he says as he pushes aside another curtain of drapes. He looks into the room beyond the drape but takes a sharp breath in shock. Inside is a skeleton lying in the snow, surrounded by many more skeletons of Fire Nation soldiers. "So they were here," Aang says and enters the room and looks around with a sad expression on his face. He takes a closer look at the skeleton, sees that it has with a round necklace that supports the symbol of airbending. "Gyatso," Aang says, devastated. He might have thought he was prepared for the knowledge that the Fire Nation attacked the temple, but he was not prepared to find out for sure by seeing the skeleton of his mentor and father figure surrounded by skeletons of firebenders. Aang drops to his knees in the background and lets out a mourning sigh just as Sokka pulls the drapes aside and looks around, though still not seeing the skeletons. "Hey Aang! You find my dinner yet?" Sokka says, but Aang just continues sitting on his knees, his head cupped in his hands. Sokka walks toward him. "Aang, I wasn't really going to eat the lemur, okay?" he says reassuringly as he approaches. Then he notices the skeletons. "Oh man," he says sadly. He places a hand on Aang's shoulder. "Come on, Aang. Everything will be alright." He then says, "Let's get out of here." Suddenly, Aang's arrow tattoos begin to glow a bluish white. He lifts his head to show his eyes glowing in the same color. Sokka retracts his hands and gasps for air in fright. Inside the sanctuary, Katara is walking down the circular pattern of statues. She stops before and looks at the statue of Avtar Roku, when a glowing white light starts coming from its eyes. The light then spreads to the other statues as one by one, their eyes start to gleam. Katara stares at Roku in shock, before realizing what it means. "Aang," Katara says in worry before she turns around and sprints away. Across the world, similar things were happening in other temples, indicating the full return of the Avatar. In the Fire Nation, this meant that they need to send word to the Fire Lord, while in other countries it was a sign that gave them great hope. Aang was aware that in the real world he had began forming whirlwind begins at his feet. The wind was kicking away a bone. The wind even started to form a sphere around him. Far away he heard Sokka's words, but was unable to react to them at all, since the Avatar Link was mostly in control of his body. He then hears Sokka scream and the building around him getting thrown apart. When he feels the air sphere expand into a raging tornado with him in its center, he starts fighting harder to regain control. That was when he suddenly found himself in a white room, though he still knew exactly what was happening with his body. He looked down, and was surprised to see that his body looked like Naruto rather than Aang. Then 5 other people appeared around him. QB, Hinata, Sasuke, Tsunade and Aang. "I thought you were gone with the merge," Naruto/Aang said. "We are mostly," the QB says. "Except for Aang, we are merely echoes of our past selves, but we are still with you." "What about Aang then?" Naruto/Aang. "He is completely a part of you. He is like a second conscience." QB says he lost control of the body, but still has some effect on you personally. That is why, even though you know what damage it could do to the world, you still haven't completely dismissed the possibility to be with Katara and only Katara, even if you told her otherwise. And he is the reason you didn't complete bury Zuko's ship in ice. Okay, but why am I here now then? Naruto/Aang asked. Because you needed to know that even if we aren't physically with you, we are still with you and supporting you, whatever happens, Hinata said. Also, you needed to be aware of the effect Aang has on you, even if it mostly your choice of words and reactions to some things. As you probably noticed, he hasn't really said anything in here, and that is because he is mostly a part of you anyway, so he doesn't need to really say anything. Also, he is more of the guiding force of the Avatar link at this point, which is why you have absolutely no control, Tsunade added. Meanwhile, Katara had joined Sokka. What happened? She yells at him over the winds, her face worried. He found out firebenders killed Gyatso. Sokka shouted back. Oh no! It's his Avatar spirit! She yells, raising her hand to protect herself from wind and debris. He must have triggered it. I'm going to try and calm him down. She then closes an eye against the wind and starts to make her way toward Aang. Well, do it, Sokka says while holding on to the rock in an attempt not to get blown away. Before he blows us off the mountain. Katara fights the storm to get to Aang. The sphere of wind that surrounds Aang slowly starts to rise in the air, and Katara is pushed back by the strong wind currents that fill the remains of the building as it ascends. Soon Aang stops ascending, but strong winds are rampaging through the rubble of the destroyed building. Katara and Sokka are holding on for dear life on some stones, trying not to get blown away. Aang, I know you're upset, and I know how hard it is to lose the people you love. Katara shouts calmly with a sad expression on her face. I went through the same thing when I lost my mom. She continues, diverting her eyes at the memory. Monk Gyatso and the other airbenders may be gone, but you still have a family. Sokka and I. At this, Sokka opens his eyes and glances at his sister. We're your family now. Aang begins to descend. Sokka and Katara watch him lower himself back to the ground. The winds start to die down, and the air sphere that surrounded Aang disappears. However, his eyes and tattoos are still glowing bluish white. Katara and Sokka pull up next to him, one on each side. Katara and I aren't going to let anything happen to you, Sokka says gently. Promise? Meanwhile, Katara takes Aang's hand. The moment she does, the glowing fades away of his hands fade, followed closely the arrow on his head and his eyes. His eyes close before he collapses from exhaustion in Katara's arms. I'm sorry, he says in a sad and tired. It's okay. It wasn't your fault, Katara said. Guess this confirms that they found a way to access this air temple, and that means they found the other ones too. Aang says, then opens his eyes. I really am the last airbender. Katara is about to hug him when she sees something weird about his eyes. Aang, do avatars normally get purple eyes with rings rippling through them? She asks him. Aang frowns. I am sure that I have heard that description before, or maybe seen eyes like that, but I don't know if it was related to the Avatar, he admits. What else could it relate to? Sokka asks, confused. Well, I guess this is as good a time as any, Aang says, straightening up. You see, Sokka, when the Avatar link traveled from Sokka to the next reincarnation, it hit something along the way. That something was a soul from another dimension that then ended up being transported with the Avatar link to its target. The soul spent 12 years experiencing Aang's life without actually controlling anything, which in the end caused the soul to see itself as being Aang as well. When the Avatar link took over control the first time, it forced the soul to the forefront, causing it to merge with Aang and create a kind of joint consciousness. He decided to leave out the parts of the old Aang still being separate, and trying to influence him. Sokka looked shocked enough already, so he thought it was a good idea to keep it simple. What? Sokka said before fainting. After Sokka woke up, Aang explained everything in detail, and told Sokka that this was not something he should ever try to poke fun at. Aang also explained that he was intending to train the both of them. Sokka was all for learning more about fighting, though he didn't show much interest in learning about chakra magic abilities, as he called them. After that, Aang spent some time figuring out his eyes. After seeing them in a reflection, he realized that it was the same eyes as both Nagato and Madara had, the Rinnegan. How he had gotten them he wasn't sure, but knew part of it was Sasuke merging with him. When finding out how to deactivate it, he had also found out that he had both the Sharingan and Byakugan. He also found out that even though he had them, he had absolutely no clue about how to use them. Unlike those that come by the dojutsu naturally, he had no idea about how to use them. He couldn't even properly activate the Sharingan, and using the Byakugan just made him dizzy because his vision flickered all over the place. He also couldn't access any of the abilities that Nagato had shown, or more precisely, he didn't know how he was supposed to do them. In the end, he decided to save working with them till after he had trained Katara and Sokka up a bit. They were now getting ready to leave the air temple, Aang standing in front of Roku's statue again. Sokka stands up to a side while Katara pulls up next to Aang. Everything's packed. She tells him, "You ready to go?" "How is Roku supposed to help me if I can't talk to him?" Aang asks softly, though a slight frustration can be heard in his voice. "Maybe you'll find a way," Katara says, trying to reassure him. They glance at each other when they hear something behind them. They turn around and see the flying lemur standing on its back legs in the middle of the doorway. The animal as it jumps to the right, toward where Sokka is standing. The animal reaches his feet and drops the load he was carrying, a variety of fruits. The lemur quickly dashes away as Sokka sits down and starts to stuff his face with the fruit, taking large bites of 2 different pieces of fruit. Aang and Katara smile at Sokka. "Looks like you made a new friend," Sokka Aang says happily. "Can't talk," Sokka says, looking up with an exhilarated look upon his face while he pushes the food into his mouth with his hands. "Must eat." He takes another big bite. The flying lemur climbs onto Aang and hides behind his head, his tail curled around Aang's neck. "Hey, little guy," he says, looking at the lemur from the corners of his eye. After they return to Appa, Aang stands next to him with Momo perched on his arm. "You, me and Appa," Aang says to the lemur, "we're all that's left of this place. We have to stick together." He then turns to the siblings who are fiddling with their luggage. "Katara, Sokka," he yells, and they turn to look at Aang, Sokka still eating a peach. "Say hello to the newest member of our family." As Aang approaches the duo, Katara asks, "What are you going to name it?" Sokka is about to take another bite of the peach he's eating, when the lemur suddenly leaps off Aang's arm, takes the peach and returns. The animal starts to nibble from it. "Momo," Aang states, then laughs along with Katara when they see Sokka still stands there, mouth open and hand in front of his mouth, ready to take a bite of the peach that is no longer there. However, he has no peach anymore. Soon they are leaving the Southern Air Temple. Aang is sadly staring back at it, leaning on the luggage that is tied at the back on Appa's saddle. Momo chitters quietly as they fly further away from the temple. Dark clouds slowly move in front of the temple, obscuring it from view. Part end. So how was the story? I hope you like it. Share this story with your friends and comment down if you want more stories like this. I will meet you in the next video. Peace out.